So now that I've kind of refined the block out, then I want to move into Photoshop and start setting up a base for my just general decals. So I'm thinking like caution logos, logos for the company, flight, or sort of like aircraft numbers, I guess, maybe a tail number, stuff like that. So what I'm doing is I'm simply creating a black and white texture that for now is just a mask, and then I will load that mask onto floating planes in Modo, and I'll just float those above the surface, and I will use these or I will go to my progressive render to sort of see how they look. This is pretty much the final workflow that I'll use, but what I'll do is I'll float the planes like this and just make sure that they're not sort of like clipping with the actual asset. And then in UE4, I will build a projected decal shader. So the actual shader on the planes will project the decals that I'm building down onto the surface below. So the decals themselves don't need to be perfect. And also I don't have to worry about it casting shadows back onto the surface below or anything like that. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm creating one channel that is color and one channel that is alpha, and then I use a script in Photoshop that will move the black and white alpha sort of group that I'm building, and it will move it into the alpha of the overall image. So the image RGB will be sort of like white, orange, black, red, whatever colors I need for my actual decals. And then the alpha will be what you're seeing at the moment. So in Modo, alpha is treated as black is visible and white isn't visible, which is why I'm doing it that way. And then the alpha will just be inverted for UE4, because most 3D packages, Photoshop, for example, Modo, UE4, they all use white visible and black is invisible. So I will just invert it at that point. So all I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm sort of creating text that I think would be needed for a vehicle like this. Also looking at reference and seeing how they look in my progressive render. So even in this case, you can see that I don't have to worry too much about it casting shadows or causing problems because it's so close to the surface of the mesh. So when I do just pre-rendered art like this, without taking it to a game engine, then this is the same process I use. I just float the decals just above the surface, make sure that they're close enough that I don't have to worry about shadows being projected, and then that's it. So all I'll basically do is I'll go through my whole vehicle thinking where would look interesting if there was logos or labels or caution signs and things like this. And as I sort of feel I need an area or something new, then I can look at my reference, add something to my Photoshop file, re-export it, and then just create new decals from that. So you can see what I'm doing here is I'm trying to think, okay, I need some sort of caution sign for the moving parts on this gun. So I'm literally just doing just that. Like I'm grabbing polys off of the gun, the existing sort of gun parts, duplicating those, floating them above the actual gun kind of pivot, and then I'm just UVing those to my decal sheet, checking out how it looks in my progressive render and continuing on. So this is something I need to think about relatively early, because adding these decals will remove the need for extra modeling detail and stuff like that, because as we spoke about, I'm using decals, normal decals and modeling all to increase or decrease the level of fidelity or noise in an area. So if I have a blank open space like the bodywork, this is a great time for me to sort of have an area of rest, but also to tell a bit of a story, as in like the branding of the company, the name, or I guess like the name of the actual drone, tail numbers, whatever you want to call this, kind of things, just sort of an identifier for the vehicle. So these are all really great times for me to do this. So then in the dark areas, I would typically, sort of the dark hardware areas of the drone, I would typically only have things like warning labels and stuff that's useful to the engineers or the mechanics who work on this. And then on those big open spaces, then I can have identification numbers like the M08 you can see. And maybe in some places I'll have OTEC Industries so that people know who this belongs to. Or I could have, probably I'll end up putting Reaper down the side of the vehicle so that people know that this is a Reaper drone. Maybe they've heard of them, but maybe they've never seen one. So they know that this thing is dangerous and kind of not to mess with it. So again, what I'm thinking is this is a moving part, so I should probably add some kind of random little triangles to help kind of give a sense of like, this is the direction in which you should be cautious. And then also, I think on the actual sort of barrel of the pivot that you can see, then I should add caution here as well, or maybe something along the lines of, I don't know, just something along the lines of, this is a label, it adds fidelity to the area, but it's also there for a reason, and it just kind of helps to add depth to the design. So once I've done this pass of kind of going through and adding just normal decals to the whole asset, then I'll need to go through and set up a normal decal sheet, and then go through increasing kind of actual frequency in the design using those. So typically in a offline rendering scenario, I would just model all of the small details into it. But because I need to be optimal in the way this asset is built, then I'm going to use a normal decal sheet to add small details to the asset. This also typically means that very small details, when they're modeled, they don't LOD well. So as you move away from the vehicle, those small details will break down and not look great. Whereas if the small details are in a texture sheet, and as you move away, the texture sheet starts to MIP, the details will become softer, but they won't create problems like anti-aliasing or aliasing. So typically these smaller details just generally end up looking better in a game engine if they're sort of baked anyway, which is exactly why I'm thinking that will be my process. So I'm sort of thinking, okay, this can be my tail number here. As you can see, I've just duplicated the faces below it, and then I'll float this area here. Maybe I need to scale it up to sort of make it readable. And what I'll do is, this isn't me finished with the decal sheet. This is just me sort of starting it and thinking, okay, these are the areas I was always already thinking of that needed some of this detail. But as I go along, then I might notice an area and think, okay, this camera could really do with a label, or the gun could really do with some sort of detail on there. So yeah, this is the whole process.